Hi, and welcome to Acronis, our information security series. Today, we're going to be discussing malware. So we're going to discuss what exactly is malware, trends in ransomware, potential signs that you've been hit, what are some incident response steps that you're supposed to take, and then tips for malware and recovery. My name is Steve Brining. I'm a partner technology evangelist here at Acronis. I'm with the company for about 4 years. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 25 years, mostly on the manufacturing side for software, and I'm currently a commanding officer in the Arizona Army National Guard. So what is malware? Well, if you take the words malicious software, mal, and then ware is in there, and that's how you get it. It's any program or file wanting to be harmful to a computer or user or company, damaging devices, stealing data, or causing some kind of chaos. Now, there's different types of malware out there. There's ransomware, viruses. I can go through the list here. Trojan horses, spyware, keyloggers, botnets. Today, we're going to focus a lot on ransomware because that's the most common and one of the most dangerous. So we're going to be talking about ransomware trends there. Now, keep in mind, malware did start back in the 1960s. Hackers back then created viruses for displaying harmless messages that spread to their computers. When you got to the late 80s, well, things started to get nasty there. The first example of a damaging virus, it was called the Vienna virus. It corrupted data and destroyed files. That led to the first antivirus program out there. But at this point, because ransomware is the most common and dangerous, we're going to talk about ransomware trends. Keep in mind that malware is about the intended use, not the technology or the technique. So, trends in ransomware. Fewer targets for attack, but higher ransomware payments. There's also ransomware as a service out there. People that don't even know how to develop ransomware can go to a service and get information and get software to deploy it for ransomware. And remote workers are a target. Recently, there was a ransomware attack that happened with Kaseya. They do IT solutions for MSPs. They announced that they became a victim of a supply chain attack on July 2nd, leveraging a vulnerability that was in their VSA software against multiple MSPs. They were able to quickly come out with a release a couple of days later to fix the vulnerability as well. And there's more information about that, but just know that these attacks occur and they're very recent, and they also hurt service providers out there. So trends in ransomware. Ransomware not just encrypting the data, it's sold or leaked to cause damage to reputation to companies, as well as legal and regulatory fines. There's an extort with promise not to release the information out there. A ransom payment to not release the data. I saw that with the University of Utah, paid $457,000 at one point to make sure that the information wasn't leaked out there. They didn't necessarily care about getting the data back. They just wanted to make sure that the thieves did not release the data. Going after the backup agent and data, they search for the connected data sources and then they encrypt the backup copies. So attacking the backup agent and then trying to get to especially cloud services is one trend that's happening in ransomware. So let's talk about some signs that you've been hit. Of course, with ransomware, if you get a message for a ransom payment, probably got hit. Slow device performance, there's many pop-up ads that happen, browser redirects, infection warnings, buy to fix this, challenges starting or shutting down devices. Now this is for malware overall to show potential signs that you might have been hit. So when you've been hit, you need to know how you will handle an incident. Is it going to be in-house? Is it going to be third party? Is it a combination? You got to make sure that you have clear rules and responsibilities in place on the incident handling instructions. So the first phase is preparation. You got to know what to do before something happens. So you're in front of the systems when attacked and thinking of a course of action. It's probably not the best plan. Select your incident plan team. Report the mechanisms. Communicate the plans out there and have software in place to utilize when an incident occurs. Next, identification. gather the data and analyze it. Determine if an incident did in fact occur. You have to calmly assess the situation. It's not going to help anybody if you are stressful in the situation, so calmly assess it. Be ready to communicate out there. Handle the evidence properly, proper chain of custodies, and because there could be possible legal challenges later if you don't handle the evidence properly. Then containment. The goal is to prevent further damage. If an incident did occur, likely some damage has happened somewhere. So you want to contain the damage not to spread to other systems, networks, or the data. Disconnect network and or power cables. Modify your firewall rules and also change DNS information. If the spread has stopped, make a backup copy for analysis, also a second copy for forensics analysis. Got to make sure you have a forensic backup. Is the system to remain in production? Well, you got to have additional containment efforts. So the intention of this is to temporarily keep systems up while building another system or decision for long-term plan for a compromised system. Then you have eradication. Can be challenging to completely removal of the code and data left by the intruder. Also requires a complete closure of holes used by the attacker. You have to have a cause of the incident to understand that first. Then the system rebuild from a known good backup copy. If you do not have a backup, then you're going to have to build the system from scratch, including the operating system. Now, recovery. You want to have your operations return to normal. System rebuilt, you have to revalidate that information that it is in fact good for production. Got to verify the system is secure to make sure that it's not going to have the same or similar attack. And then you have to do a lessons learned program from this. Evaluate the incident afterwards. What caused this situation? Configure the systems to make sure it does not happen again. Understand the laws around disclosures and breaches. The reporting is to describe an incident and inactions moving forward. Just want to make sure you don't prevent a repeat of things. In the military, we have a thing called an AAR, an after action review. And part of that is lessons learned. So tips for malware and recovery. You have to train your users how to recognize common attacks out there. You have to provide a system or method to report suspicious activity. We have a saying in the military, see something, say something. Also, social engineering vulnerabilities. We have another video series that talks about social engineering, but also train users on social engineering attacks. Know where your important files are. Which applications are going to be critical to you? Where is data in order to operate? And also try to do a business impact assessment. Also, mail server filtering. Filter your messages and attachments for suspicious items. Now, you want to train often. Not sure what that means to you. That could be quarterly. That could be in Zoom meetings. But remember, security is a responsibility of everybody. It is a team effort. Backup critical files and choose a reliable backup service provider. Develop a plan on recovering if needed, when to recover, who will do it, and what to recover. Test the recovery plan. Does it meet your RTO's recovery time objectives and RPO's recovery point objectives? Disaster recovery option along with backup? You might want to think about that. Define your frequency and methods to use for testing the plan. Monitor your critical files. Do you have file integrity monitoring? Do this also for your backup locations, and then changes to backup files, document and research those. Update patches and require a VPN or virtual private network for all remote access. Require antivirus and anti-malware software on all computers and devices. Keep them up to date and run scheduled scans, and also have firewall rules with rule sets that are restrictive. Have a team in place for the incident response. Know the roles of each individual and clearly define them, part of the testing team. Recover only what is needed in order to improve your recovery time objective. Granular recoveries or software recoveries for you in the process. You have to think about these things. Do not trust an untested plan. Have different recovery intensity levels. Keep in mind, the more you go in intensity, risk increases, so carefully plan this. It's a balancing act. And with that, I hope you understand what malware is, what the different types of malware are, and tips for recovery and how to handle things. Thanks for watching. Hi, and welcome to Acronis, our information security series. Today we'll be talking about social engineering. So we need to discuss what is social engineering, the life cycle of social engineering, what are some techniques used in social engineering. Part of those is phishing, which is huge business, and I'll explain that, and then some tips to help prevent social engineering attacks. My name is Steve Brining. I'm a partner technology evangelist for Acronis. I've been with the company for about 4 years. I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 25 years, mainly on the manufacturing side of software, and I'm currently a commanding officer in the Arizona Army National Guard. So what is social engineering? Well, it's manipulating, deceiving, or influencing someone to gain control over a computer system or to give up some kind of confidential information. Now, this could be through email, letters, snail mail, phone, or direct contact with you. And they're trying to trick you into giving bank information, passwords, and access to computers. It's easy to exploit because there's a natural inclination to trust. It's easier to fool someone giving a password than trying to hack a password, unless, of course, that password is pretty weak. There's a life cycle to social engineering. And the information gathering is to gain credibility and establish trust. So they prepare, they do some reconnaissance, they try to identify the victim or victims, they'll gather information, and then they're going to select the type of attack they want. Then they try to develop relationships. They engage the target then, they spin a story of some sort, and they try to build trust with the target. Once they build trust with them, then the exploit happens. They try to execute the attack, and then they ask for a call for a task to be carried out. Now, this could be like logging in, software installation, or some other malicious activity. The action could be different features like password resets, logging in, or getting cloud access, for example. Once they've done that, they execute, then they try to exit. Once they've gotten that sensitive information, they disrupt, get the data, they try to cover their tracks, and they try to bring an end to it and close out it. Now, there's many techniques out there for social engineering, and some are quite surprising. So phishing, hopefully you might have heard of that, but it's to gain sensitive information using email, and it tries to evade spam filters. Bank and social websites, they're typical scams for that. Spear phishing, it's a small targeted attack on particular people. Research has to be done on the target, and then they personalize that to help them do something that's against their own interests. Whaling is spear phishing, but directed towards senior executives or other high-profile targets. You have baiting. It's putting something in front of the victim to take action. USB thumb drive is put out in an elevator or a bathroom and say it's labeled US payroll list. Well, people get inquired about that. Hey, let me take a look at that. They use the device, their computer gets infected. Quid pro quo. Benefit to the victim in exchange of getting information. Hackers say is trying to be IT support. They call people, hey, quick fix, you just need to disable your AV right now, and then you get malware. Tailgating, that's getting access to a building. They wait for a user to open it, they pass through a secure entry, and then they follow behind. Honey trap. It makes a person interact with a fictitious, attractive person online. Diversion theft. They target transport courier companies trying to trick a company into delivering something other than where it was supposed to be delivered. Pretexting. It's a false motives involving some real information on a person like social security number, date of birth, in order to try to get more information. Then you have rogue spyware. That's malware that deceives, misleads some user to pay for some fake or simulated removal of malware. It's a popular choice out there. There's artificial intelligence voice changing technology to help hijack a person's voice for fraud schemes. And then we were talking about phishing, and it's huge business out there. Say you get an email from a friend. Well, they hack the email password, and they might have access to your contact list. You might use the same password on other sites. Well, guess what? They have access to your email. They send emails to all the contacts, and they can even leave messages then on your social pages. Some other areas of phishing. You may get emails that say, "Hey friend, I'm stuck in a country, I've been robbed, or I'm in a hospital, can you please send money?" There may be some charity at the top of mind of situations going on in the world, like even today. Donate, fundraiser cause, they ask for aid and support for those in disasters and political campaigns. There's a problem, but it's requiring you to verify information by clicking on this link and providing information on a form, but you got to act quickly. Hey, you're a winner of a lottery, a relative passed away, or you're the 1 millionth person to click on this. Please click on this link for the site. And it now asks you to send more information to them in order to get the prizes. They pose as coworkers or your boss. They ask for an update on an important project, say it's proprietary. What about payment related to a company credit card? So here's some tips to help you prevent attacks. Keep in mind the human element is involved in this. The problem can never be solved with social engineering. However, continued security awareness training. Do some baseline phishing security tests. Assess the company baseline of being what they call phish prone. Run some simulated social engineering tests to help keep users on their toes. Also, slow down. They want you to act fast and first and think later. It's high pressure or a sense of urgency. Please be skeptical of that. Do not let links control where you land on the internet. Find the website yourself. You can hover over the links to see the actual URL. Email hijacking is huge. Once they have control, they'll prey on the trust of your contacts. Not expecting an email within a link, check with your friend or coworker before opening or downloading. Do not know sender or a file coming in. Beware the download. If you got an email from a foreign lottery or money from an unknown relative, very high probability that's a scam. Delete requests for financial information or passwords. Reply, just validated your email address. Request for help, reject it. You did not ask for the information like credit restoring or refinancing a home. It's probably a scam. Request from a charity with no relationship, delete it. You should seek out the organization to give. Set your spam filters to high. Secure your systems. Have email filters, anti-malware software, firewalls, and please update your patches. For a smartphone that does not auto-update, there's a manual update that you receive in a notice. You got to be careful with that. Utilize anti-phishing solutions. And with that, I hope you understand what social engineering is, the attacks that have been used, why it is such an easy way for them to compromise security, and tips to help you prevent social engineering attacks. Thanks for watching. Hi, and welcome to Acronis, our information security series. Today we're going to be talking about distributed denial of service. When we first saying, what is distributed denial of service, or DDoS? How does it work? Common types of DDoS attacks, concerns for service providers, and tips for mitigating DDoS attacks. My name is Steve Brining. I'm a partner technology evangelist here at Acronis for about 4 years in our Cyber Protect side. Been in the industry for over 25 years, mostly on the manufacturing side in cybersecurity space. So a distributed denial of service attack is an attempt to disrupt normal traffic or targeted server services or networks maliciously, floods internet traffic to a target or infrastructure around it. It's used to compromise systems as a source of attack traffic, and this includes computers or other network resources like IoT or Internet of Things. The analogy I like to use is think of some unexpected traffic jam clogging the highway, which prevents regular traffic from arriving at its destination. So how does it work? Well, computers and other devices like IoTs get infected with malware. This allows an attacker to remotely control them, and they're called bots or zombies, And then if you take a group of these computers or IoT devices, then they're called a botnet. The botnet, once established, the cybercriminal then directs attacks, sending remote instructions to each bot. Each bot then sends a request to an IP address of a target machine to overwhelm the service or network. The result of that, denial of service from normal traffic. Each bot's a legitimate device on the internet, so separating attack traffic from normal traffic can be challenging. At the end of the day, it's multiple systems taking part in an attack simultaneously. How do you identify this? Well, a service or site can get slow or unavailable. Now, there could be some legitimate spike in traffic to create some challenge, so you need to investigate a little further. An example would be a software company where you release a major version of a product. There might be some spike in the internet traffic after the release. There could be an unexplained surge in requests to some endpoint or a single page, or there could be odd traffic patterns. Are there spikes at odd hours of the day or some unnatural pattern? Say, are you having spikes every 15 minutes? Now, there's common types of DDoS attacks. The OSI model, otherwise known as the Open Systems Interconnection model, there are 7 layers, and there's 3 main categories of attacks here. So we're going to discuss these on the next series of slides. The first is an application, or at the layer 7, as you see, floods applications with malicious requests, and this is measured in requests per second. It is challenging to defend because it's hard to differentiate malicious to legitimate traffic. So an HTTP flood is like hitting the refresh on a web browser over and over and over again on many computers, all at the same time. Now there's protocol or network attacks, and this affects the 3rd and 4th layer in the OSI model. It's to overconsume server resources or network equipment like firewalls and load balancers with large number of packets, and this is measured in packets per second, and you'll see something called SYN floods. Now, SYNs target TCPs, or transmission control protocol servers, like web servers and email servers. And there's a 3-way handshake that's needed here. So think you have a client and a server. Well, the client needs to send something called a SYN message, and that's a synchronized message saying, hey, hi, I'd like to sync up with you. Then the server has to then say, yes, you can sync with me, but I'm also acknowledging this with you. Client further then has to confirm the connection with a final acknowledgement message. Well, then a TCP SYN flood is when the system is flooded with all those SYN requests there in the red, and it overwhelms the target, making it unable to respond to new real connection requests. So once you have this 3-way connection, the communication does get established. But like I said, there's so many SYN floods going there that it can't respond to new real connections. And then finally, there's volume-based, which is massive bogus traffic to overwhelm a resource, a server or website. And this is measured in bits per second. Concerns for service providers. There's distributed denial of service, booter services. They're on-demand DDoS attack services. These reasons can range from folks trying to increase their hacking skills, business rivalries, extortion, government-sponsored terrorism to ideological conflicts. Now, a competitor with not many skills can employ scripts or programs written by others to launch this attack on you as a competitor. Since they don't know how to do much, we call them script kiddies or skitties. Now, I know there's one service out there that has different levels of intensity and length for the DDoS attack, and these range, well, I've seen it from like $20 to $150, and what's interesting, they even offer 24/7 support. Now, in 2019, there was relatively a small amount of DDoS attacks. Well, at the end of 2020, there was a massive uptick in attacks. There's something called RDDoS attacks, and that's a threat of a DDoS attack unless a ransom gets paid. So they target victims that are less able to respond and recover from such an item. Concern not on an attack on your business, but you have to think about attacks on your business partners, vendors, suppliers, and whatever your business relies on. What is the goal? You want to differentiate normal and attack type traffic in order to help mitigate these DDoS attacks. The more complex the attack, the harder to decipher normal versus attack traffic. Dropping or limiting traffic could throw out good stuff with the bad. So there's a layering ideal solution here. Rate limiting. This is good for web scrapers, stealing content, and brute force login attempts. By itself, it's not sufficient enough to handle a complex DDoS attack. Web app firewalls. This will help with layer 7 that we were discussing earlier. This is between the internet and the server. You filter requests based on a series of rules. You could do something called an Anycast network, where this scatters attack traffic across the network or distributed servers to a point where the traffic gets absorbed by the network. Well, this is going to depend on the size of the attack as well as the size and efficiency of your network. Do you have some kind of DDoS mitigation plan ready? Have you thought about a disaster recovery plan and testing procedures? Now, keep in mind, attackers will watch how sites respond, and when you're back online, they'll adjust with the new attack method, so you got to make real-time adjustments. Think of having DDoS protection plan and mitigation services. I can't recommend one for you here, but just Google and you can see that there's many companies out there that provide that. Combat application layer attacks in line. There's web protection tools, add redundancy to an application, deploy to multiple public cloud providers. Also, look for secondary attacks. DDoSes can be a distraction for another attack. Have you reset factory preset passwords on anything that's connected to the internet? Have you gotten rid of the admin? And disable things that you don't really need. And finally, do you have firewalls installed on a server? Are security patches up to date? Is your antivirus and malware software running on a schedule? And also regularly monitor system logs. And with that, I want to thank you today. Hope this helps you with DDoS attacks, understanding them, and tips for mitigating them. Hi, and welcome to Acronis, to our information security series. Today we're going to be talking about password security. We're going to be talking about why is password security important. We're going to talk about things that we should not be doing with passwords, and then some best practices around passwords. My name is Steve Brining. I'm a partner technology evangelist here at Acronis. I've been with the company for about 4 years, been in the industry for about 25 years in the cybersecurity space, mostly on the manufacturing side of software, and I'm also a commanding officer in the Arizona Army National Guard. Why is password security important? Well, I have to talk about complying with industry-specific requirements. HIPAA, PCI DSS, just credit cards, and also for Europe with the GDPR. Also to help protect against credential stuffing and password spraying attacks, which are main vectors of initial intrusion. Now, credential stuffing is taking users' stolen names and passwords from one company, say they purchased it even off the dark web, to access user accounts at another company using the same password on multiple accounts. So cyber bad guys add a list of stolen user names and password pairs to some botnet to automate the process and trying on multiple sites at once. Now, the password spraying attacks, that's trying some brute force attack. It's an attempt on the same password on many accounts before moving on to another one and repeating the process. It's to overall boost resiliency to security threats. User passwords form the weakest link in security today. Now, there are some things that are some basics, but I see people that still do these, so do not do these things. Network usernames as your password. Do not use words like user, admin, or password. Don't put details about yourself. It's not as confidential as you think. Family member names, your social security number, your date of birth, any personal information. Also, don't go adjacent on the keyboard. There's something called QWERTY. If you look at your keyboard, QWERTY are right next to each other. And definitely do not store a list of passwords on a computer in plain view on some post-it sticky note on your computer. Now, some best practices around passwords. Now, NIST has come up with some updated guidelines for 2021. Now, a lot of companies do have policies in place, but I'm following what NIST has put in their guidelines for 2021. And you can read this in their digital identity guidelines, which is SP 800-63B. The -3 is the third revision. Users no longer have to use special characters. Users should be able to maintain passwords using regular characters, including spaces. They highlight repeated spaces should ideally get trimmed. Password policies, not requiring employees to change passwords on a regular basis. They advise against the need to change after specific time periods. Now, you should change password in the event it's been exposed or some evidence showing that it's been compromised. In the FAQ from NIST, it talks about users tend to choose weaker memorized secrets or passwords when they know that they will have to change them in the near future. When those changes do occur, people often will select something similar to their old memorized secret by applying a set of common transformations, such as increasing the number in the password. So this would provide a false sense of security if any previous secret has been compromised, since attackers can apply the same common transformations. Stop unnecessary password complexity from NIST guidelines. Many users substitute a letter with a number, and attackers know the most common ones used. Password length is more important than complexity per the NIST guidelines. Also, screen passwords against blacklists or these dictionaries. It's a list of commonly used or compromised passwords. Keep this list up to date. There's third parties that do provide these lists. If you Google password screening software, you will see that there's many companies that do provide this. Section 5.1.1.2 in the NIST guideline talks about memorized secret verifiers, otherwise known as passwords. If it's characters or numeric, it's a PIN, something you know. They say verifiers shall compare the prospective secrets against a list that contains values known to be commonly used, expected, or compromised. Also, use a reputable password management solution. Master password, make that strong, because that's used to encrypt the contents of the vault of all the others, and there's only one to remember. You got to remember, if you forget the password of the master, you're out of luck. You don't have to remember every strong, unique password. They're stored in the vault, and many will help you even generate new random ones for you to use. It's the best way to use different random passwords on many sites using a password management solution that's reputable out there. NIST also put in their guidelines, it's reasonable to copy and paste passwords. The ability to paste into a password field facilitates the use of many password managers, and it's a well-advised practice per NIST. But also keep in mind, password length, while we said that's more important than complexity, password length from a password manager greater than 64 characters is not recommended from NIST as well. So I hope this helps you understand about password security, why it's important, some do's and don'ts, and some best practices around password security. Thanks and have a great day. Hi, my name is Steve Brining. I'm from Acronis, and welcome to our Information Security series. Today we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication. We're going to be talking about exactly what is authentication, different authentication factors, why is this important to know, is it foolproof, the benefits of using, and then some recommendations to help you with multi-factor authentication. Again, my name is Steve Brining. I'm a partner technology evangelist here at Acronis. Been with the company for about 4 years. Been in the cybersecurity industry for a little over 25 years, mostly on the manufacturing side, and presently a commanding officer in the Arizona Army National Guard. So, what is authentication? It's a process to assure and confirm a user's identity. Before accessing systems information, you got to prove that identity and have permission to access. Associated incoming request with a set of credentials. Now, identification. User claims their identity. That's a username or email address as an example. Then you need to prove that identity with some authentication, which would be the password. So when you claim both the identity and a mechanism to authenticate, that is considered your credentials. You cannot have access control if you can't identify a user. There's different authentication factors. Something you know, like a password or a PIN. Now, these are, out of all of them, deemed the least secure because it increased security. You can reduce that by having password complexity. Something you have. It's something you physically hold. It's often used with something else like a PIN or a password. You can have USB security keys, common access cards, otherwise known as CAC readers. In the National Guard, we have CAC readers, and we have to insert our IDs in there. And then it asks us for a PIN with that. And then finally, something you are. This could be fingerprints, retinal scanners, voice recognition, facial recognition, even iris scanners. You got to be a little cautious of that one due to medical privacy issues. I've seen a lot with fingerprints. Keep in mind, these cannot be rotated once compromised. Think about it. pretty hard to change your fingerprints. So, another way to look at it, knowledge, something you know, possession, something I have in my possession, and something you are, something inherent to you. Now, two-factor authentication is a subset of the multi-factor authentication we just went through. If you use all three factors, that's considered multi-factor authentication, but two-factor authentication is the most common subset that you see. Now keep in mind that while this is an extra step in the authentication process, it's a certain amount of minimal time, but security gets increased. So that a little extra time will help with an overall security posture for your organization. Why is this important to know? Well, think about it. Google, you can have one password that gets access to email, calendars, YouTube, and other apps with just one password. As a matter of fact, in 2017, they admitted hackers stole about 250,000 web logins each week. Healthcare, changing medical records to bill fraudulent companies. Altered records can also impact your healthcare and even your personal credit. Now, most hacking-related breaches are due to stolen or weak passwords. It's all about risk reduction. Now, is it foolproof? No. Your phone can get water damaged or general damage. It's pretty hard to get SMS codes from that. Or if the phone loses power and there's no way to charge, you don't get your codes. You put your USB keys in the laundry or they get misplaced, it's pretty hard to get the codes. Now, if you can reset without access factors, well, so can a hacker. Hackers can set up or reconfigure two-factor authentication to keep folks out of accounts. Biometrics, they get compromised, like your fingerprint, well, that's kind of for life. Now, keep in mind that some may not be comfortable giving fingerprints to a company in order to do biometrics. Hackers can steal your phone number and redirect codes. And SMS services out there, you need to trust the service to share phone numbers. Benefits to using this. Well, it helps secure against ID theft via stolen passwords. Keylogging, for example, is secretly recording keystrokes on a keyboard. Phishing is fraudulently asking a victim for sensitive information, say via an email, SMS, or a phone call. Farming, that's installing malicious code onto a device that redirects the user to a fraudulent website where they'll go ahead and enter the sensitive information there. So often referred to as phishing without the lure, so the lure being the imposter's malicious email. Weak passwords out there. OWASP out there found that 123456 password and QWERTY, which is right across on the keyboard there, it's one of the most commonly used passwords globally. And Larry Ponemon of the Ponemon Institute, early 2020, found that over 50% of IT professionals reuse passwords across different workplace accounts. Helps mitigate usage of unmanaged devices. If you have a personal device, it's having less secure internet connection, accessing company networks, multi-factor authentication will help you there. It also helps with other security measures to do their job properly. Analogy, if you have a back entrance open to the house, you're putting a deadbolt on the front door when the back door is completely wide open. It increases employee flexibility and productivity. Password policies are in place, but then you forget passwords from time to time. So when you hit forget password, instead of just giving you a new password, multi-factor authentication helps there. And from a compliancy standpoint, there are many state laws that require companies to have strong authentication processes in place, especially if you're handling sensitive financial or personal information. Multi-factor authentication will help with identity and access management solutions like SOX and HIPAA. It also helps protect against social engineering, phishing, or password brute force attacks if credentials are stolen or they're weak. It can also help against bot-related attacks. Employees using their own devices, bring your own device. Well, think of open Wi-Fi networks. Two-factor authentication helps attempts with stealing or phish for a username and a password via the open Wi-Fi network. Man-in-the-middle attacks. Two-factor authentication doesn't allow hackers to spoof push notifications to a personal device, even if the password gets compromised by something what they call a man-in-the-middle attack. One password across many accounts. Two-factor authentication will still give you an added layer of security via push notifications, even if one is using the same password across multiple accounts. Malware email attachments. Even if one would fall prey to malware attachments, One can protect their login credentials by confirming every login attempt accessing their account. And then also with cloud storage, two-factor authentication will give cloud users the ability to validate every login attempt with their personal device, no matter where they are in the world. This becomes a choke point for organizations. You can use it to secure data in the cloud. It does reduce time consuming password resets. For your help desk, it helps reduce that burden there. And then with remote workers, it encourages productivity, safely accessing corporate systems from any device or location without putting sensitive data at risk. It can also create frustration to hackers, yet many service providers still risk things by a password-only approach. Now, hackers, it is appealing to attack service providers out there because one attack can compromise many service provider clients. So say a service provider, your RMM or remote management software, they get access to that, which then gives access to client systems. Service providers, you get credibility intact here because service providers are now a radar for cyber criminals, and it gives a sense of security and comfort to your clients and prospects because you have admin access to their machines. It also helps prevent security incidents, which helps prevent remediation costs. Multi-factor use, because a single factor by itself is not enough. Most popular is user-chosen password, but there's two challenges with that. Weak passwords, susceptible to what they call dictionary attacks or brute force attacks as well. And finally, easier to steal, especially with that phishing, logging, or the man-in-the-middle attacks. So a recommendation, it's a balancing act. TOTP, you might see that's called time-based one-time password. Using an authenticator app is good. As a matter of fact, Microsoft did urge users to abandon telephone-based multi-factor authentication solutions, like one-time code sent to an SMS and voice calls, and instead replace it with newer MFA technologies like app-based authenticators. Microsoft has one, Google has one, there's others out there. Careful keeping backup codes if you lose or break a device. Signing in with multiple devices might help you. And don't just rely on security questions as a two-factor method. If the site requires them, treat like a second password. Store answers in some reputable password manager out there. It's unwise to answer the questions directly. Drop-down questions, many are easy to dig up on a person, like the street you grew up on. And finally, use multi-factor authentication whenever possible, but especially relating to sensitive data. I do recommend using password managers, as that will really help you from a recommendation standpoint. So I hope this helps you today with understanding about multi-factor authentication, the different types there are, and the benefits to it, as well as the recommendations. Thanks for watching.
Everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and we'll take a quick look in this video at phishing, which is obviously on a lot of people's radar, as it should be. It's a major problem. What it is, well, essentially phishing in its basic form is an attacker sending out emails purporting to be some other entity and maybe trying to get users to open an attachment, click on a link, enter their credentials. They might have different goals, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like essentially trying to trick people into doing something via email primarily. And there's different forms of it. There's spear phishing that is way more targeted than normal phishing. There's whaling that might be targeted, but actually at very high valued targets. So maybe like CEOs or IT directors. And then there's variants of phishing depending on the media that's used. Phishing, for instance, would be over like phone calls, right? So lots of different forms of phishing, but at the end of the day, usually what's happening is the attacker is trying to pose as some legitimate service like a bank or a social networking site, and they're presenting you with a story that is trying to entice you to do something that you shouldn't do. And that could be, again, clicking on the link, running that attachment. And usually they'll use a little bit of psychology to trick you. So phishing is a major concern. I mean, it can cause reputational damage in the event of a breach, loss of data. You know, if an attacker is able to get malware into a network, they might be able to exfiltrate some really sensitive data, or minimally, you might see account credentials exposed. Productivity can also be lost while you're recovering from phishing attacks. And Same thing applies to service providers, right? You can have a massive financial impact if a service provider that you work for is affected by phishing. If accounts of a service provider in particular get compromised, then that can have an effect not just on the company providing the service, but also on all customers that might be affected. Because those accounts can kind of, depending on the account, be golden keys to a number of different other customer companies. So it's really easy to do phishing. It's easy to spoof email sources, and it's even available as a service. And then furthermore, just to make things more stressful, it is more common during times of crisis like global pandemics. So we've got to be on our games when it comes to phishing. And it's kind of there's no one solution to prevent phishing, but keeping informed, cautiousness and being critical and really evaluating emails before you click on links is a pretty big win in and of itself. Beyond that, you might have email security solutions, either as appliances or cloud-based email security solutions. Security software might help with malicious attachments, just keeping software up to date and doing common other things, right? Like verification via phone call is also a really good mitigation against phishing. And so any one of those things isn't going to be a silver bullet, but together it makes phishing a lot less of an issue going forward, a lot less of a risk. So yep, be careful with those emails. See you in the next video. Hello again, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and this video is going to focus on VPNs or virtual private networks. So conceptually, they're pretty straightforward. Most VPNs provide an encrypted tunnel between 2 points, and any traffic that goes over that tunnel is secure, regardless of whether the tunnel itself is being established over an insecure medium like the internet. So it's a great way for us to have secure remote workers, for instance, or inter-branch connectivity without having to get dedicated links from ISPs, because those tend to be slow and really expensive. So there's different types of VPNs. There are remote access VPNs, which we can maybe set up for our employees that are working from home or roaming. And those typically are SSL TLS based, or they can be IPsec occasionally. Site-to-site VPNs are more static, and they connect something like maybe it's like a HQ and a branch office, and they are more or less persistent and allow the exchange of data between two sites. That's almost always using IPsec. Another type of VPN, going back to client-based VPNs, is the always-on VPN. And this is something you can configure on end devices, maybe laptops, so that whenever the user maybe logs into their computer or turns it on, it connects up to the VPN, and it has to be connected to the VPN. So what the benefit there is, if you've got security appliances on-prem, like a web security appliance, email security appliance, well, their traffic is getting routed to whatever that prem is, that local area network, and any security appliances that you're using on-prem will also be filtering traffic from users with always-on VPNs, because their traffic just has to go through your network, your central network. So that's really beneficial. It gives you a lot more control over the traffic that is and isn't allowed from resources like laptops that you might own or the customer might own. So VPNs are incredibly important. They give us fast, cheap, secure connections between sites, as well as remote. They make work from home a lot more secure and even just possible. So it's really important that we not just use VPNs, because that's kind of natural for work from home, but we secure it properly. So a few ways that you might want to, think about securing your VPN. You can look into zero trust models, but even before I would do that, I'd look into things like, first off, making sure that you're using secure protocols. OpenVPN is a great secure protocol. IPsec in conjunction with IKEv2, good stuff. And then the actual cryptographic protocols as well you might want to look into, or algorithms. So you'd want to be using AES instead of the ancient DES. So if you choose secure protocols and crypto algorithms, that is going to be a huge win over the alternative. Another big win is multi-factor authentication. So you don't just have to log in with a username and password. Maybe you also have to, maybe you set it up so that users also have to provide a 6-digit PIN. The benefit there is that if a password gets exposed somehow, attackers can't log in through the VPN and gain access to local resources on the network. So you definitely want to secure data. You want to secure things like VPN logs, and not just secure them, but also monitor them on a regular basis, because you want to be able to catch if you're getting VPN connections from a random country at a random time, maybe early in the morning, because that is a really good indicator that you might want to look into something. So that's all we got for VPNs. As always, thank you very much. See you in the next video. Hey everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video we are going to take a look at PII and privacy, so personally identifiable information. First off, let's define that. Well, it's anything that can identify a unique individual or uniquely identify an individual. So it could be a single data point like a social security number that really just points to one person, or it could be a combination of data points that are enough to uniquely identify someone. So maybe a date of birth and an IP address is more than enough for us to say, well, those correspond to this person and only this person. So that's kind of what PII is. It's just the data or enough data to identify someone uniquely. And it is a bit of a challenge because there's lots of laws that protect PII, tons of them, but at the same time, we do need to collect it for business transactions or consumer transactions. Financial institutions need to collect PII, and the list kind of goes on from there. So while we do need to protect it, and there are consequences for not doing so, we also need to keep it around. We can't just not keep it. So one example of a PII law is GDPR, and that applies primarily to European citizens, but if you've got European customers or branches, then it applies to you too. There's heavy fines with things like GDPR, and oftentimes laws like that are going to define how you have to store data, the protections that need to be in place, where data can be stored, breach notification time periods, so you might have to report within 72 hours, and so on and so forth. And if you don't follow these regulations, or if your customer doesn't, they might be subject to significant fines, reputational damage, or worse. So as far as the impact on MSPs, there are a few. First off, service providers, managed service providers can be held responsible for securing the PII that their customers are working with. So it might end up kind of splashing back on the MSP if there's a major breach affecting a customer. Customers themselves, of course, are going to have liability, and they might have significant fines, reputational damage themselves if they are breached. And so what we want to do wherever possible is use encryption for data at rest, data in transit, data wherever. We want to encrypt it if it's at all possible. And that's sort of the key best practice with PII, encryption wherever possible. And you might need to follow the particular strictures of the regulations that you have to abide by, but it will typically say you either need encryption or you need a specific type of encryption. You just have to follow the regulation that applies. So encryption is absolutely a must. Multi-factor authentication is a huge win too, so that even if a password gets compromised or exposed, attackers can't get access to accounts. And threat monitoring, continuous monitoring, things like that will also help you detect and respond to attacks, breaches much more quickly and proactively. Just a little bit more, there are some other security controls you can put in place. DLP, right, to detect either intentional or unintentional exposure of data. Data masking to remove maybe identifying characteristics in data and make it less of a breach were it to be breached. Principle of least privilege, making sure that only users and services that need to access the data or modify it can access or modify it. And of course, segregation of duties as well, where no one employee has the keys to the entire kingdom. So thank you very much for joining me. It's definitely an important topic. PII is really critical to protect, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor with my CCNP in security and CYSA Plus, Security Plus, some other certifications as well. In this video, we are going to take a look at privilege escalation. So it's all about kind of getting privileges that you aren't supposed to have, especially if you're an attacker that's already compromised an account. So generally speaking, if an attacker compromises one account, that might not be the end goal. They might need to get access to some other resource, and the account that they've compromised might not have the appropriate permissions to do so. So what they'll do is try to get access to a different account. And you can imagine how this could be dangerous if they are actually able to escalate privileges or change privileges, then they could modify data, delete data, just break things, whatever they want to do, depending on how the permissions are defined. So there's two different types of privilege escalation. There is vertical escalation, and this is what we oftentimes think of when we think of privilege escalation. This would be going from like a standard user account to an administrative user account. And that's pretty obviously not great. But there's also horizontal escalation. So you don't just have to go from a standard to an administrative or a root account. You can also go from a standard account to a different standard account that maybe has the permissions that you're actually looking for. So if you want to attack a database, well, maybe you try to take over the account of a database user, right? So horizontal versus vertical, they are targeting different things, administrative versus kind of user accounts, but they can be equally devastating. So as far as prevention of privilege escalation, strong passwords are a huge win, so that the attacker can't just use something like Hashcat to guess the password to try to crack it. Least privilege rules, so that even if an attacker gets access to a given account, they only have the most restrictive set of permissions available. And heuristic analysis is one other tool that you could potentially bring to bear, and that would be looking for anomalous activity, deviations from the norm, and hopefully trying to identify attacks from different data points there. So why is this important for service providers? Kind of makes sense that service providers, especially because they need to have administrative accounts, maybe spread out across many different users. If those accounts were to be compromised, it would be kind of a disaster. It's kind of the keys to the kingdom in a lot of senses. So in order to protect both the reputation and like business viability of service providers, as well as to protect all their customers, we need to make sure that we are trying our best to mitigate and prevent privilege escalation wherever possible. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next video. Everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this quick video, we're going to take a look at suspicious hosts. So these could be any IP address or domain name out there on the internet that is associated with a less than reputable server. It could be there to harvest credentials, for instance. So suspicious hosts, one of the main reasons that they are able to cause harm is because they a lot of times are posing as another site. This is one example attack where they might look like a legitimate site. Maybe it's your site or a banking website, but they actually aren't, of course. They've basically just copied the HTML and they exist. Maybe they're squatting on a typo so that when users incorrectly or accidentally access a URL that points to that server, then, well, they try to log in and they provide their banking credentials to some hacker somewhere. So that's one example of why suspicious hosts are a concern. I mean, they can cause a lot of harm. They've caused harm in probably most of our families before. At least 2/3 of Americans have had passwords or used the same password across multiple domains. And I would assume a pretty large fraction of Americans also have had their passwords compromised, which means they weren't just compromised for one service that they were using, but they were potentially compromised for any other services that were using the same username and password. So it's a major concern, these suspicious hosts, credential harvesting attacks, and so forth. And some of the ways that we can mitigate these attacks or these risks are by implementing multi-factor authentication so that even if an attacker gets a user's password, they can't log in because they also need a 6-digit PIN or biometrics or something. So MFA is a really strong mitigation. Consolidation of user identities instead of having user identities spread out across many different services and systems, actually consolidating them and maybe using federation. Limiting lateral movement where possible so that even if user accounts are compromised, they can't be easily used to pivot to other systems or other accounts. And also just logging, right? So logging and especially monitoring privileged access is going to at least give us a heads up in the event that an account has actually been compromised. So thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next video. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video, we're going to take a look at removable media. And that can include a lot of different things, right? CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, flash drives, maybe even phones if they're connected by USB, and the list kind of goes on from there. If you're really retro, floppy disks. So anything that's kind of, you can put data on it, remove it, maybe put it in your pocket, would be considered removable media. So what to keep in mind for removable media? Wherever possible, we should be using encryption. We should try to separate corporate data from personal data. We don't want it to intermingle. And we want to keep track of all the removable media devices in our environment so that they don't grow legs, go missing, maybe with some sensitive information on them. And a little bit more, if possible, if it's just not necessary for users to use optical media or USB keys or something, you can always just disable either the optical disk drives, USB ports, or whatever the case may be, either through BIOS or through group policy. And if users don't need it, then there's really no reason to leave it enabled, and that can be a huge security win. So as far as mitigating risk with removable media devices, because they can be used for both data exfiltration as well as for getting malware into a network that might otherwise be really secure, well, we only want to use removable media devices when authorized. We probably want to have checks in place to find unauthorized use of removable media. Password protection and encryption wherever possible is going to be a huge win. Scanning removable devices for malware, again, it makes sense, right? Especially if they're coming in from maybe another company or a customer. And when not in use, especially if removable media devices have some sort of sensitive information on them, you probably want to physically secure them as well in a safe or a lockbox of some sort. So yeah, don't ever plug in USB drives that you find in a parking lot. Hopefully that goes without saying, but that is a common, somewhat common attack vector for different bad actors. And if you have removable media devices that go missing, you want to report it. So we talked about the risks here. They can get malware into an environment, or they can be used to get sensitive data out of an environment. So it's definitely a concern for businesses, and they've been used in a lot of high-profile attacks, Stuxnet, for instance. So best practices would be, again, keep your personal and professional data separate. Check with the media owner before using media if necessary, if required. Use encryption, use passwords, physically secure the media device wherever possible. And when the device is no longer in use, we want to wipe it, right? If there's any residual data, especially if it's sensitive data, we want to overwrite it to make sure that future users can't maybe find that data using specialized tools. Documentation and tracking and inventorying of removable devices is also a big win, because that would help you know if one goes missing. And if it's got sensitive information on that, you probably want to know and you probably want to follow up. So thank you very much for joining me for this part. I'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm still a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video we're going to take a look at working remotely and some of the security concerns and controls that we can put in place. So this is something that's really, for a lot of companies, come up rather suddenly in the recent year or so with COVID, and it has presented a lot of opportunities and also challenges. So as far as challenges go, VPN creation and just administration of VPN tunnels for many different remote users, adequate devices, actually getting devices to users when they didn't have the devices on hand that they could use themselves. BYOD policies, getting their mobile devices brought in, that's been a challenge for a longer period of time, but still something to think about. So as far as work from home users go, whether that's customers work from home users or internally at a service provider, we want to avoid public Wi-Fi because you don't know what snoops are going to be out listening. Tracking devices and their connections to the network. You don't want to not log those things. You want to be able to make sure that if someone logs in at 2 a.m. from a different continent, well, you should probably be able to detect that and maybe follow up on it, right? And of course, you want to encrypt devices. That could be hard drives as well as traffic using VPN tunnels wherever possible. So for service providers, this is kind of a major concern. Even service provider employees are going to be working from home to some extent, as well as their customers' employees. And the issue with service providers is that their networks are a huge target for attackers. Because if attackers can get service provider credentials and put those to use, then they might not just be compromising one company or two companies, but dozens or hundreds of companies. So service providers are a huge target, and we want to make sure as service providers that we lock down any work from home users and systems as much as possible. So as far as overcoming obstacles goes, I want us to talk about VPN technologies first. Those are sort of your first step in transitioning workers to work from home securely. Those would establish a secure encrypted tunnel between the worker and the remote site or the HQ, and allows the user to access corporate resources in a secure way. Backup, of course, is still something that we need to consider. So how are we going to back up users' data from their systems that might be now distributed across many different counties or states or whatever the case may be? So some sort of remote management solution is probably going to be called for there. Cloud protection. When we're talking about cloud resources specifically, we might want to run periodic vulnerability scans and configuration management scans to make sure that the cloud environments in use are properly set up and they don't have any glaring security holes. And yes, we talked about remote administration, but this is sort of necessary now because we can't drive around to everyone's house to help them out with their computers. So remote administration tools are going to be kind of relied on in order to successfully help out customers and their employees. So as far as the key takeaways for service providers, we need to stay on top of patch management of all these different systems. They are geographically dispersed now, but we definitely want to make sure that they are getting their patches on a regular basis and they aren't vulnerable for any long period of time to different security flaws or attacks. We can use automation wherever possible to continuously monitor VPN connections, as well as other system states, and try to catch things before they become an issue. And of course, reporting. Especially if we have a dashboard with like a single pane of glass that allows us to drill down into events. That's something that we can use to really proactively and quickly respond to incidents before they become a huge thing. So thank you very much for joining me for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey all, my name's Shane Sexton. I'm still a cybersecurity instructor. In this video, we're going to take a look at cloud security, which is really important since more and more organizations are moving their resources to the cloud. So regardless of whether we're talking about public cloud resources like with AWS or private clouds, either on-prem or through service providers, we need to make sure that those cloud resources are as secure or more secure than any on-prem resources. So this is absolutely important to service providers since, again, more and more companies and hence more and more customers are moving their resources to the cloud, and the consequences of a breach are equally severe and sometimes more severe than on-prem resources. So it's definitely a major concern. And there are a number of different cloud attacks that are out there that you might see in the news. Data breaches are really common. Amazon S3 in particular has had a pretty rough time of it in the last couple of years. So just misconfigurations, for instance, of permissions can have a huge impact, which is actually the next one. And actually, these two are very closely related. When you're talking about S3 data breaches, most of that is from user misconfigurations. Access to backups. This is another attack that you might see, or a threat to the cloud. If backups are accessible, then that might essentially allow attackers to gain access to information that they shouldn't have access to, and it could lead to a huge exposure of information. And we've got plenty more attacks. The cloud gateway Or the cloud console, the administrative console, if that gets compromised, if attackers can get into that, they can do whatever they want, destroy resources, spin up resources, mine Bitcoin. And of course, insider threats are going to be a concern regardless of really where what we're talking about, on-prem versus cloud. If you have an insider threat, they can absolutely cause a lot of damage. So best practices for cloud security: you need to identify the data that needs to be protected and maybe classify it and protect it according to its sensitivity, log things, monitor those logs, actually audit them. And using DLP can also be a big win with cloud resources, just try to make sure that sensitive data is not exposed. Uh, Use multiple layers of security, not just the cloud vendors' security mechanisms, but also on operating system or application-based security. Always encrypt wherever possible, whether we're talking in transit or at rest. Use least privilege, especially for cloud administrator accounts. Make sure that they are locked down to only what they need as far as privileges and permissions go. And when you do have incidents, one thing you don't want to do is figure out how to respond to them by the seat of your pants. You want to be ready, have your response ready, have documentation, have people trained. You don't want to be figuring this stuff out as you go. And then when the incident actually occurs, if you're properly prepared, you'll have more time to preserve evidence for analysis, for law enforcement. Maybe even think about automating your response wherever possible. Maybe rolling back in an automated fashion to previous configurations. And practice is actually really important. Training and practice go hand in hand, but if it's just watching videos of some random cybersecurity instructor, that's not as good as getting hands-on practice. So getting some practice in is my number one recommendation, kind of regardless of what you are practicing. So that's it for cloud security. Once again, thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next video. Hey everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video we are going to look at physical security, which is kind of one of two necessary elements of cybersecurity in general. So we talk a lot about technical security controls like firewalls, but all the technical security controls in the world aren't going to get us very far if someone can just walk up to a server and plug in a USB key. So we need to have physical security controls, and those really boil down to restricting access to facilities or sensitive areas or even individual systems so that anyone, Joe Schmo can't walk up and maybe install malware on a system or on a set of systems. So there's some threats to physical security. They could be something like shoulder surfing, where someone stands behind you and is trying to see something sensitive that you're typing in to your computer. There are access points to your facility. Since we have employees that need to come and go, we've naturally got doors and so forth, or maybe even hatches on the roof, and those should be monitored. If they're not being monitored, if there isn't a locking mechanism in place, then those become very attractive for attackers who might want to sneak in and circumvent any security controls. Tailgating is sort of the de facto social engineering attack against facilities, where you have maybe a penetration tester or a malicious actor trying to gain access by standing in front of a door and acting like they belong until an employee walks up and badges in, and then they just follow in behind them. So tailgating is a major concern. One way that you might mitigate that is by implementing a policy where only one person, per badge scan is allowed in, so that you can't just sneak in amongst a crowd of employees. You could enforce that with a security guard or with a turnstile or even a man trap if you have the budget. But just kind of enforcing that can make it much more difficult for attackers to kind of slink in undetected. So we've kind of discussed why physical security is important, because again, any technical controls you have in place will fall apart if someone can just walk up to the system that you're protecting. It's just once someone has physical access, it's kind of game over. And really the key control that we have for physical security and for physical access control is going to be policies. You might have, for instance, a policy in place that has teeth that really, really makes it so that employees will look behind them even, before uh, they enter a building to make sure that they aren't being tailgated. So I've seen companies that even go that far where they make it the responsibility of each employee going into a building to make sure that they aren't being tailgated. And that is a pretty strong policy, but it turned out to be pretty effective. So because physical security is really reliant on human behavior and the comings and goings of employees, policies are going to be one of the best controls for it that we have. So thank you very much. I'll see you in the next video. Hey everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video we're going to take a look at mobile security. So increasingly common that we have to worry about this because we've got more and more users bringing their own device in a lot of cases, or at least they're expecting to have mobile devices to do their work, whether that's a smartphone, a tablet, something else. So we need to extend security not just to our traditional laptops and desktops, but also to mobile devices because there are a lot of threats out there that face mobile devices. There is absolutely malware that can affect Android and iOS, for instance. Theft is a major issue, especially if the device isn't encrypted and if it doesn't have a passcode of some sort. The data itself might be accessible to an attacker. And even public Wi-Fi, so data in transit, might be sniffable if an employee is maybe accessing a network that isn't secured and has an attacker, snooping around on it. So as far as mobile security controls go, we have, one thing we could do is remotely update, patch, maybe use MDM to even remotely wipe mobile devices in the event that they're lost or compromised. So there are a lot of robust MDM solutions out there that we can use to remotely manage mobile devices. There are compliance, there's standards and frameworks that you can apply to make sure that you are kind of following best practice as we currently understand it. Backing up is, of course, I feel like I don't have to justify this, but just like with normal devices, backups are going to be really important for mobile devices, especially since they can be lost so easily. And as far as BYOD is concerned, now this is a great boon for users and businesses because businesses don't have to buy devices. Users get to use the devices that they want to use. The issue is how do we actually secure those devices? And that's where something like MDM would really come in handy, maybe with segmentation of work and personal data, for instance, and the ability to remotely manage at least what the business is supposed to be in control of. Mobile anti-malware can be useful, even if you've got a virus that was emailed and it arrived on a phone. Even if it's not targeting that particular mobile operating system, it could still target Windows. So using mobile anti-malware where possible might catch viruses before a user accidentally sends them on to other individuals. We talked about backups, right? And the importance of backups across all devices. Application management is another big win for mobile devices. You can select or maybe predefine what applications are or are not allowed on mobile devices. And VPNs are going to be what protects users when they're connecting maybe to a public Wi-Fi access point. So you can establish a secure encrypted tunnel between the user and the corporate resources and make sure that no one can snoop on that traffic. So we definitely need to make sure that mobile devices are secured because they have all the same capabilities as standard laptops and desktops. And a lot of times we have less control over them. So they're a major concern. So again, with BYOD, this is a particular difficulty, but it has lots of opportunities. And the main reason it actually presents difficulties is just because these are not our devices, they're not owned by the company. So we need to think long and hard about how we're going to secure that device and what control we should have over it versus what control the user should have over it. How do we segment data, personal from work data, and so on and so forth. So it's really flexible. Lots of people like it, but it's not without its caveats, right? All right, so thank you very much for joining me for this whirlwind video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video, we're going to take a look at DLP, or data loss prevention, which is a broad set of tools lots of different forms it might take, but it's essentially looking for sensitive information and trying to prevent the intentional or unintentional disclosure of that information to unauthorized parties. So that could be an agent running on a system. It could be built into a number of different like products, for instance, Microsoft Teams, and it could even be an integration with cloud resources to monitor and prevent the exposure of sensitive data that might be held in the cloud. So lots of different forms it can take, but at the end of the day, it's looking for sensitive information, things like social security numbers, credit card number patterns, and trying to prevent that from being exposed to unauthorized parties. Because the information that DLP is trying to protect is really juicy stuff for attackers, right? And they've got a number of ways that they might try to exfiltrate data. If we are sending unencrypted emails, they might just be able to pull that off the line, as it's traversing a network. Maybe there are cloud storage or even on-prem storage solutions that aren't configured with appropriately restrictive permissions. And potentially an attacker, if they get clever, they might be able to reroute or otherwise pull data from an otherwise secure device to a less secure device and then have access to it from there. So there's all kinds of different strategies that they might use to gain access to the data and then exfiltrate it. And data exfiltration, you can make an entire class on that. So the reason this is important, there's about 10,000 stories to choose from, but one of them is the SunTrust bank hack. This was actually an insider threat. So an employee stole 1.5 million, roughly, customer records and was selling that information for financial gain, right, to make a little bit of money. So we definitely need to be monitoring any sensitive or PII, PHI, any sort of sensitive information that we might be in charge of handling. As far as service providers are concerned, one of the best things you can do to protect data isn't even to go immediately to DLP solutions, but to use encryption wherever possible, whether the data is in transit, at rest. Try to use it if it's at all feasible, and that's going to make it much more difficult for attackers to get access to the plain text of that data. If they get the ciphertext, it's not that useful for them. So encryption is number one, but of course, other methods of protecting data might include appropriate permissions, right? And privileges for users' accounts, for the file system as well. Need to know, you can also kind of enforce that through file system permissions and privileges. And also classifying data and securing it according to its sensitivity is a great way to make sure that you're not wasting too much time securing otherwise unimportant data, but that you're really securing the important stuff like PII. So software also should not be allowed. Users should not have permissions to install software, but if they do, it should still not be allowed, right? Because there are all kinds of different communication apps, for instance, that a user might use for data exfiltration if they're allowed to bring in Zoom or Skype or whatever other solution they want to use for communication. So we should really be in control of the communication apps that users are actually using so that they don't end up using that for data exfiltration. So beyond that, you can of course look at DLP solutions as well, but I think the most solid foundation comes from encryption and having a sensible security baseline in the form of user privileges, file system permissions, and so forth. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, my name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor, and in this video we're going to take a look at remote monitoring and management solutions, which make life a lot easier for a lot of IT departments. They usually allow us to do a ton of things remotely and even automatically, and that could be routine maintenance tasks, it could be patch management, inventory control, and of course monitoring of systems. So it makes life a lot easier, however, it's not without its risks. Because you can imagine, if you can do all that with RMM solutions, then well, just imagine what an attacker could do. We're talking about admin level or system level accounts that might be in play here. So if an attacker is able to somehow successfully attack an RMM solution and get access to it, then they may have the keys to the kingdom, and not just for one company, but maybe for a number of different client companies. So we've got to make sure that these RMM solutions are as locked down as possible, because the impact is pretty dire. I mean, there could be reputational impact, data exposure, there could be system downtime, there could be financial impacts like lawsuits and fines, and the list kind of goes on from there. So we really got to make sure that we use as many security tools as we have in our tool belt to secure these types of solutions. And just to list off a few options here, it could be using a dedicated VPN for RMM traffic. It could be use of two-factor authentication so that even if an account is compromised, maybe the username and password, attackers still can't get access to it because they don't have that additional factor of authentication. It could be separating networks, network segmentation, and of course, network monitoring is another way that we could detect attacks before they become too severe. Keeping service provider accounts just locked down, using the principle of least privilege is always going to be important too. We should always be making accounts and assigning permissions and privileges that are the bare minimum necessary for folks to do their jobs, because any additional permissions and privileges are just additional risk. So by using many different complementary security controls and tools and techniques, we can make it hopefully more difficult than it's worth for an attacker. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you in the next video. Welcome back. My name is Shane Sexton. I'm a cybersecurity instructor. This video is going to be about wireless security. So primarily, wireless security is all about Wi-Fi. That is really the most attacked of the different wireless communication protocols and types out there. There are attacks against Bluetooth and NFC, but Wi-Fi is really the heavy target, right? It's the main target that attackers like to focus on. All kinds of different attacks you might see, evil twin attacks where you've got an imposter access point, maybe posing as a legitimate one, war driving where someone either maybe drives around the block looking for open Wi-Fi access points or parks in the parking lot to use your Wi-Fi if it's not secured. And then encryption cracking as well can be a major concern because there are various tools out there that make it relatively easy, maybe not speedy, but easy to get the password for a given WPA or WPA2 network and then get access to the network itself. So as far as securing Wi-Fi networks goes, you definitely want to secure the router itself by changing the default credentials. You can choose to not broadcast the SSID, and that might make some people unaware of its existence, but that's not like a silver bullet by any means. And you can also, well, you should absolutely secure the actual Wi-Fi network with a password at a minimum. You can use MAC address filtering, but that is going to require a lot of administrative overhead to keep the MAC addresses up to date so that users can continue to access the network itself. So it might not be the best or the first solution that you go to. So really your first solution is going to be using strong encryption, and that really means WPA2 with or without 802.1x. So 802.1x, that would use Radius and a few other protocols to allow per user authentication to a Wi-Fi network instead of using a global pre-shared key, and that improves security. WPA2 improves security because it's just a relatively secure way of encrypting wireless traffic. And there's even WPA3 on the horizon, so you might want to look into that as it becomes more common. But yeah, absolutely use strong encryption, use a minimum of a password, and preferably some sort of radius-based authentication. And if you can, set up a guest network so that when you have folks come onto your maybe on-prem, you can give them guest access, and that at least allows them to access the internet to do their work. So as far as aiding customers, it's important for us to, well, secure their wireless networks in the same way we might secure their wired networks or their cloud networks. So that could be doing analysis of the wireless systems, scans, maybe automated scans, even manual penetration testing to evaluate the security posture of their wireless systems, and really evaluating the encryption standards in use. Are they using WEP or WPA? Because that's not ideal. Hopefully they're at least using WPA2, and if not, that would be a major win in securing their networks for them. So that's all we got for Wi-Fi. Thank you, as always, and I hope these videos were of use to you.